In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for you.
Boom, we are back. Happy whatever day this is, Taylor. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. You shared a very fun historical story. It's interesting. I feel like our as we're getting into our groove with these things, it's becoming more and more predictable what we end up talking about. Like I can almost, even without knowing anything about the topic, I think you probably could guess what I'm going to talk about.
Hmm.
Do you think you can guess it?
Are you going to give me any hint besides that?
Knowing what I like to talk about.
Ezra Klein. Other podcasts?
How's the book, by the way?
Good.
Any fun things that have, or things that have been illuminated for you there?
No, I gotta pick it up again and finish it. It's almost due.
Yep. No, we are not sponsored by Ezra Klein, but I will go to the grave. Ezra Klein fanboying him. No, my topic is gonna have to do with another air disaster.
Ooh.
There's just so many of them, and they're all. It's so interesting, like how these small, stupid little things build up and result in something horrific. The problem is that you don't know that. Oh wait, you know what? Why don't you introduce us?
Oh, I forgot. Hello. Welcome to Doomed to Fail. I'm Taylor, joined by Fards. We bring you history's most notorious disasters and failures and interesting stories twice a week, and we have covered many an air disaster because it's fascinating and scary.
And it's because like you don't know what you don't know until it happens. Then you know, and you're like, oh yeah, we should do that from now on. And it's like, well, 1,000 people are dead. Like, you know.
Right.
So
Oh, also, we've like barely been doing it.
maybe it's because I watch and read
I mean
so much of
flying.
this content.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like
okay.
flying's like very, very new for humans. It's pretty incredible what we've done so far, you know?
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm gonna cover another plane disaster, and mostly it's just like it gave me like insight into like the superstructure of like aircrafts, and it makes it so much more scary because then you can like think about what's behind the walls that you see in a plane. That's
Oh God.
like there's so much that you're not seeing that could be going wrong that nobody sees. So I'm gonna cover a really bad one. It's Japan Airlines Flight 123, which went down on August 12th, 1985, killing 520 passengers and crew.
Wow.
It was huge. Can you imagine that? 520 people on a plane. I think like maybe the A380 can carry that capacity. Like,
Yeah, I know. That's a lot of
it's a
people.
lot of people. There were actually 4 survivors in this one, which is crazy.
Whoa.
So we're going to talk about the plane, the flight, the investigation, and what's happened since. So, the plane. The plane we're going to talk about is the Boeing 747 SR variant. There's a ton of variants of individual plane types. Like you hear about the 747, there's a 747-100, the 200, the 300, the 747-8. There's like they create all kinds of variants of these planes. The SR in the 747 here, do you know which one this is? It's the bubble one, right? You know that?
Right.
Okay.
Does it have like a second floor?
Yeah, it has a second floor.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. The SR in this case.
Have you seen snakes on a plane?
Oh yeah, of course.
Is that like that?
I haven't. That
Kinda
movie
like that
came out when I was
staircase.
like 18. I don't think I don't recall. But
Oh my God. Continue.
so the SR and 747 SR stood for short range. This variant was specifically built for Japan. Japan Airlines requested this plane because there were several things that are going on. It's also like ties into world history, which is really fun. So they needed an ultra high capacity, very short range hauler. And the reason was that apparently in the 70s and 80s, Japan's economy was like the best. It was the biggest. Like it was the King Koopa. I don't know how you describe it. But interestingly enough,
I feel like that was the joke that like everything was made in Japan.
well, yeah, I mean now it's everything's
Right.
made in China, but like yeah, same kind of concept. But like
Exactly.
I mean that was
Yeah.
the time period. So yeah, anybody who's like into cars would know that like the 70s and 80s were the worst era of American cars. And Japan was like, oh, we
Yeah,
can
exactly.
totally take this market over, and they did. But because the economy was booming, there was a lot of travel happening, but also it was happening at a weird time when Japan hadn't really figured out high-speed rail. Shout out Ezra Klein. Again.
Right. So I was
Um,
gonna say that reminds me of that. Like I know a way to get there that doesn't involve going there.
there you go. Um, and so as a result of that, they're like, we need to be able to transport all these people, make us the new variant of the 747. Some changes that Boeing made for the short range version was the fuel capacity was reduced to like a quarter of a standard 747. Passenger capacity was increased nearly by double, with the top deck hump extending way past the normal variant, and all the seats were economy. Like it was, so they were
I like
packing them in
I
there.
really want I really want to raise my hand because I have a question. How do I
Gotcha.
raise my hand? Um, so I would like a plane that's capable of doing anything that just goes short ranges,
Yes, that's
right?
what they build them.
But I mean, like, I don't want it to be just like specifically short range. I feel like that makes me nervous. Should that make me nervous?
So there's a reason why you got to make a specific kind of plane for that specific kind of use, which I'm going to get into here.
Okay, cool.
The most important consideration, there's so many here, but one of the most important considerations has to do with pressurization and pressurization cycles. So think about it this way. A typical 747, like the 747-100 that we're all used to, that's a transatlantic plane, right?
Hmm.
It takes off and it lands. It goes through one pressure cycle a day. Maybe it'll go through one and a half because maybe it'll turn around in the same day, 24-hour cycle, but like that's a consideration.
Hmm.
With a short range hauler, you're not going through one pressurization a day. The thing is doing this route 5, 7, 8, 10 times a day. Every single time is a pressurization cycle. So it goes into the engineering of the entire plane to ensure that it can withstand pressurization over and over and over again.
Oh, is that something that can like age a plane?
We're gonna find out.
Shit.
But that's to your point. A lot goes into this, right? So like for example, the fact that they were going short range means they need less fuel because you can't land with like a ton of fuel, which made it lighter,
Oh.
which means you need to reduce the components, the structural components of the landing gear. Like it is a huge undertaking. It's not just like a
Hmm.
one and done thing.
Hmm.
So in this case, the plane we're discussing was delivered to Japan Air by Boeing in 1974, and by the day of this event in 1985, it had undergone about 19,000 pressurization cycles, up and down, up and down.
Okay.
Do you know what pressurization is, by the way?
I imagine it's like what makes you be able to breathe in the plane.
Yeah, it's literally that.
Yeah,
It's changing the internal atmospheric pressure so that you don't die on a plane.
right. Which is
Right.
why like you have to have an air mask if there aren't any.
Yep, it's called hypoxia, and we're going to discuss it here in a second, which is a little bit of a leading thing. But so the flight itself, the day of the event, the plane was doing its usual route from Tokyo Airport to Osaka. That's what it was, just back and forth, 5, 7 times a day.
And that's not very far.
260 miles. It actually was only 10 to 15 minutes of climbing, 30 minutes of cruising, and then 15 minutes of descent and landing. It was a quick flight.
I like those flights.
Yeah. 12 minutes after takeoff, for some reason, which we'll discuss later, the plane underwent rapid decompression. And like we're talking about here, obviously decompression is really bad. It means that there's something within the structure of the plane that is cracked, leaked, ripped off, that means the plane can no longer manage what's called an environmental control system, which is the ability to pressurize the internals so that you can breathe at 30,000 feet, which you shouldn't be able to.
That's the part that I hadn't thought about because it sounds so awful, but like why would you need to have to do that? Like what would be the case where you would have to use your air mask? And like of course it would be because it depressurized. Why did it depressurize? Because there's a hole in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. At first, the ceiling, like the top part of the plane towards the back of the plane, just caved in
Mm.
completely. And it became kind of clear shortly thereafter that whatever was going on in the tail of the plane also knocked out the hydraulic lines. And we're going to learn later on, because a photo from the ground was taken, that the vertical stabilizer, which is the big fin that sticks straight up at the back of the plane, wasn't there anymore. Whatever happened took out that whole structure of the plane. Got it?
Hmm.
So this is basically a death sentence. Like,
Right, but you're still like alive.
you're still alive.
Ugh.
When I was like watching like Mayday and all these air disaster shows, like the one thing that just keeps getting like drilled into my mind is the absolute singular worst thing that can happen on a plane is the hydraulic mechanisms going out. Because when the hydraulic mechanisms go out, the captain and nobody in the cockpit has any control over the flight controls of the plane. Like you are just at the whim of the wind and your aerodynamics. That's it. It's terrifying. Um, yeah, so I wrote here like they
And
can't rely. Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, and like that also is, I think, the reason that like planes can't just like fall out of the sky because they're going really fast and they're flying and they're so you can't just like stop that. So it's going to like slowly hover and go down and then you die because you can't control it, right?
Which is basically what we're gonna get into. Yeah, actually, it's interesting because there's only ever been one successful crash, I guess, of a
Mm-hmm.
plane that had its hydraulic lines separated. It's like the 1980s or early 90s, I think, and somewhere over Sioux City, Iowa, that this happened. And if you watch the videos of it, it's like, holy shit, that was successful. The thing just barrel rolls and bursts into flame, but only 112 people died. So like
I
that was
can't
considered successful.
I even can't believe that in this hideous year that we're living in, that plane landed upside down and everybody lived.
Yeah, it was nuts. It was nuts. So that one was really interesting because so they had all their hydraulic lines severed. I forgot what the cause of that was, but you still have your engines. And so what the captains in that case were doing was they have two engines on either or one engine on either side, and so they would just like apply thrust to one, reduce thrust in the other, and then like that'll slowly turn it one direction and then increase thrust, then reduce it to lower. Like they were trying to do it that way, but you can't do
Hmm.
that with any specificity. So like the thing just like sort of came down and then just like dropped all
Very,
the way.
very lucky.
Um, so observers from the ground, in the case of this plane, Japan Air 123, they noticed that this thing, I mean, it's over Tokyo. Like it's in a highly dense populated area. Also, it was still climbing when this ended up happening, so people could see it. What they noticed was that
Right.
the thing would just pitch up and down and oscillate from side to side. Like it was
Oh,
just like a drunken plane. Like it just didn't know what it was doing. It would basically start pitching its nose up, and then it would get to the point when the airspeed wasn't enough to sustain flight, and so it would just the nose would drop because of just like basic physics, and then it would increase airspeed as it's like plummeting to the earth, but then it would catch the airspeed again, would catch the wings, and it would go up again. Like it was just as not. It sounded like it was a nightmare for anybody on that plane.
so also like I'm looking at pictures, like the tail fin is so huge.
It's huge on a 747. They're stupid huge.
Yeah.
And the
Hold
whole thing
on.
was gone. And there's a picture. There's a grainy black and white picture of this. If you see
I've
it,
seen that. Yeah.
yeah, you can see like there's nothing there.
Wow.
So the pilots eventually tried to control the movements of the plane by doing what I mentioned with that other flight, which was using the engine thrust. Later on, we'll also learn that they didn't realize, I mean, they didn't know what was happening. And they didn't know that their cabin had depressurized. So they didn't have their oxygen mask on at any point in the middle of all this, and like through the voice cockpit voice recorder, they're like, "These guys sound drunk." Like
Right.
they didn't know what was going on. Also, we're dealing with this insane situation that nobody had lived through before.
How could they not know it was depressurized? Was that alarm off somehow? Shouldn't that be an
So
alarm?
what happened is that the plane would drop to certain levels, and then it would cause the alarm to go on and off. The other thing was that there's a mountain range that's off to the side of Tokyo. Eventually, when they go over that mountain range, the air there is thinner at lower altitudes. And so
Oh,
the pressure gauges on the internals of the plane weren't reading that.
oh my God.
So this is where we get to that piece. So the plane would basically go in this weird looping fashion, up, down, side, side. It would just roll. It was literally just at the whim of the air. That's all it was doing.
Hmm.
And it was on track with the pathway of Mount Takamagahara. It's a lot of A's, but I promise I spelled that right because I reread it 4 times and
That sounds
fact
way
checked it.
easier than trying to speak in French. So good
Yeah,
job.
yeah, fair, fair.
Hmm.
And what it was trying to do was trying to control its altitude to try and get back to an airport. I assumed that there was like a sense of like there is one part where the captain is heard saying something about like all hope is lost or something. Like it was very like they realized that this is a really uncontrollable situation.
Hmm.
The plane ends up clipping, one of the wings ends up clipping at about 1,700 feet, a ridge on the mountain. The thing rolls over, explodes, and this whole thing that these passengers experienced was over 32 minutes. Over
Oh my
32 minutes of
God.
uncontrollable up, down, side, side. Yeah, it was sounds really, really bad.
What a nightmare.
So the U.S. Air Force was tracking all of this in real time and actually spotted the wreckage first and phoned it into the Japanese authorities. Japan's Air Force spotted the wreckage that night, but reported that there were no survivors, so no attempt was made to try and get to them that night. Instead, what they did was they got to the town in the foothills and set up a base camp, essentially.
And it's probably like a really small town.
It's a very small town. Yeah.
Yeah.
Later on, it would be determined that more people had actually survived this flight than the four I mentioned earlier, but they had died because of exposure to the elements and like the frigid temperatures up there. So
I forgot that you said 4 people lived.
four
Fuck.
people lived this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an off-duty flight attendant, a mother, her 8-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old girl whose parents and sister had died in the crash as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's get to what happened. Investigators started looking at the rear of the plane, given that due to the cockpit voice recorders, it was clear that the tail controls weren't doing anything and they weren't active. And also that photo came out that we talked about earlier showing the rear stabilizer was missing. So they dug into the most crucial component in the back for pressurization, a thing called an aft pressure bulkhead. And it's like part of the thing is kind of creepy to me because it's like a huge functional thing that's behind you in every plane and you never see it because it's always hidden, but it's like the most critical part of like the structure of
Hmm.
the plane. Um the way to think about it is basically past the part that you can see of the plane, there's a huge dome like structure that is
Hmm.
made of alloy or some sort of a composite material. And the point of it is to create a pressurized seal between the passenger cabin and the unpressurized tail section. That's the idea. Keep everything in. It actually expands. It's meant to like flex a little bit because when the thing gets pressurized, it gets pressurized to 8 psi and it pushes it like a plug into place at the back of the plane.
So, okay, can you maybe do that one more time? So, like, what is back there? So there's like a space behind like where the flight attendants are, where there's like the thing like lives in there,
Yeah,
and
it's
like an
behind that.
unpressurized spot.
Yep. Yep.
And like part of the way it works, because like, is this similar to how like the screws on a plane aren't very tight because they need to be able to pressurize?
That's that. Yeah, same
Okay.
concept. Yep. Yep. Yeah, it looks like an umbrella that's been opened and is on its side and it's like just plugged into the back of the plane. And it's huge.
Okay.
Which is a problem. They are crazy difficult to replace. You have to deconstruct the plane and like
Hmm.
saw off the tail section to get this thing out because it's like a huge structural component within the plane. And in situations where they need repairs, there's like obviously pretty strict protocols in terms of what you should do and how you should repair it.
Hmm.
In 1978, 4 years after that plane had been delivered, and 7 years before this event had happened, during a landing, a pilot was super aggressive with what's called the flare of the plane, which is like that nose up approach to landing,
Hmm.
and scraped the hell out of the bottom of the plane. It was a tail strike, a bad one.
Whoa.
Apparently, a lot of people actually were injured in this because like he really did some damage to this plane. That tail strike 7 years earlier had cracked that pressure bulkhead in the back of the plane.
Hmm.
And the airline knew about it. So they called Boeing, and Boeing technicians came in and were like, well, we're going to fix it. They repaired it, and that was it. That's what they thought happened. Trying to think out how to explain this in a way that makes sense. So in this situation, the tail strike had caused cracks in the bulkhead. So if you're looking at the umbrella, there's like grooves and cracks in it, right?
Hmm.
And to fix it, the technicians were to place another metal form over that crack. And they were supposed to run 2 rows containing 3 rivets each across the entire length of it to fasten it to the air pressure bulkhead. That was the way
Hmm.
you're supposed to do it.
Hmm.
Instead, they cut a metal splice plate in half and then did the same number of rivets, but for two pieces instead of one.
Hmm.
And what they found is that that essentially means that each rivet has to hold twice the amount of pressure that a single rivet has to hold. It actually, when I was reading this, it reminded me exactly of that Kansas City Hyatt
That
disaster.
reminded me of that too, because people like it was holding the second one where it shouldn't have been holding the second one. It should have been supported by the ceiling or whatever, and
Yeah, it
they
was
were
like
holding each
if it's
other.
yeah if it was in that case it was supposed to be one thing all the way down, but what they did was they fixed the bottom one to the top one, and so then it was like two pressure points instead of one. And that was exactly what happened here. The FAA would investigate this later on and determine that the failure point for this after the repairs they did was after 11,000 pressure cycles. By the time this had happened, they were just over 12,300. So they got pretty far with it for what it was. But again, it wasn't meant to fail after 12,300. It was supposed to fail the end life cycle of the entire plane, which was decades, or I mean, not decade, maybe decade away. So, like, it was way wrong, essentially.
Yeah.
When the bulkhead reached that failure point with that 8 psi pressure blowing through it, it cracked wide open and shot back, ripping off the entire tail section of the plane. That's what knocked out the hydraulics. That's what knocked out the stabilizer. All of it. It basically doomed the entire plane. Um, and that's kind of where it ended. It was found to be a fault of Japan Airline. It was found to be a fault of Boeing technicians. There'll be obviously a ton of lawsuits involved. Two employees for Japan Airlines actually committed suicide, even though there was no like criminal liability whatsoever. But a maintenance manager and an airline engineer who had certified the plane's airworthiness both felt
Mm,
such shame that they killed themselves over this.
wow.
And it happened again. It happened again in China, like a couple of years after this. The exact same thing.
What?
There was a tail strike to the that affected their aft the aft pressure bulkhead. And back then in China, for like years while this plane was being used, people could smoke in the planes, and
Hmm.
so they lost rear stabilizers, hydraulics, plane crash, everybody dies. They go look at this thing, and they see there's nicotine stains in it. Like, where the hell does nicotine stain come from? Like, oh my God, this thing's been cracked for like 15 years, and all
Oh
the
no.
smoke would like eventually find its way out through the crack and stain it. So that yeah, they knew it was busted. It was unbelievable.
So, first of all, I can't believe you used to be able to smoke on planes. That is insane and sounds awesome.
You think that,
And
but I think you'd find it gross after a while.
yeah, maybe. I mean, it'd be gross if I was like not smoking.
Script.
You know, I mean, I'm sure that like whatever. So what about the people who lived? Like, how do they survive?
Well, there was no how. I mean, they just were lucky in their location on the plane, and they just happened to not die. Also, I did look up something about how like women, for some reason, are way more prone to surviving in situations where like there's like a survival requirements. Oh yeah, this is what it was saying. I asked ChatGPT this. Women have their metabolic efficiency is way better than men, which slows starvation. They
Hmm.
run 10 to 12%. Oh, they have about 10 to 12% more body fat than men, which means that they can survive things longer.
I think we learned that in the Donner
Estrogen
Party too, that like women survive those things a little bit better.
estrogen has protective effects on the cellular level. It enhances the immune function, reduces inflammation. Women have better cardiovascular. Dude, like it's like yo, yeah, like this list keeps going on. Like yeah, in case of famine, shipwreck, concentration camps,
Hmm.
gulags, like all of them have found that women outlive men in those
I
situations.
mean, for what reason?
I mean, although it
You
is
know,
strange because two of them are children. One was 8 and one was 12. So like I don't know
poor
if that
babies.
applies uniformly, although they're probably more resilient because they're young. So I don't know. I don't know why they survived.
Totally.
But they
Yeah,
do
it's
know
like,
for sure because they did ask the people. They were like, yeah, I would like come in and out of consciousness and I could hear a lot of screaming. And then every time I came back to consciousness, I'd hear less screaming.
oh my
And so
God.
they and so later on when they went up there, like, yeah, if they'd gotten up there that night, they probably could have saved a lot more people, but like they were just like up there strapped to their chairs,
Oh,
like
you mean on
upside
the
down.
ground they
Yeah.
heard screaming. Ugh,
Yeah.
I hate that. So in the plane, were they wearing their masks?
I don't know if they were wearing the masks. Yeah, I don't know.
I wonder. I thought you meant on the plane they would like go in and out of consciousness because you know how like if you are like drunk in a car crash, you are more likely to survive because your body can't react.
You can't tense up.
Yeah. So I wonder if you're like better off just being passed out during that. I mean,
Yeah.
you are because you have to freaking live that 30 minutes of awful, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in that case, I think getting hypoxia and not knowing what's going on is probably the best case scenario for you.
100%.
But yeah, aft pressure bulkheads. Never knew I had to be scared of them, and now I do. So there you have it.
Gosh, I wonder like it's so interesting that we've gone like back and forth on like huge planes, like with that Trump plane fiasco, like part of the issue is that there aren't airports that will take a plane that big anymore, you know?
Yeah, that was a huge deal with the A380. The A380 was supposed to be like the biggest plane in the world, and even airports that were built for 747s didn't have the facilities and capacities to like handle a plane of that
Yeah.
size and scale. And yeah.
Like we like thought the biggest plane was the answer, and then we were like, oh no, let's build trains.
Well, so that was
Or
actually
not.
part of the problem in this situation because they had tried to direct them to an airport that was closer to them that didn't require them to do this weird loop situation to try and
Hmm.
drop airspeed when they didn't have any controls. But they're like, we're in a fully fueled 747. Like, I can't land in some rinky-dink airport. Like,
Right.
I need a real airport.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah, I'm imagining. So we have a tiny airport here, so there's always, and we have like the military, so there's always planes around and stuff. And then like I'm always just so scared, and like I saw two planes like really close to each other in the sky, and I was just like, I don't want to be here for this.
have you ever looked out and seen a plane fly underneath your plane?
I've seen one like far away.
There was one time I must have just like pure serendipity. I looked down and I saw a plane fly underneath us. I was like, "Oh my God." It was like a bullet. Like I barely registered what I was looking at in the
Right.
split second that it was there. Because when you're up there, you're like, "Oh, we're just cruising."
I always forget, like like you were saying before, like how yeah, like that photo, like when you're like when I see planes like coming into Palm Springs or whatever, like, they're always like they're landing. So I can like see that it's a plane. But when a plane's at like full altitude, like you can barely see it. They're so high,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I do like when you drive past the airport at night and you can see all the planes in line. Isn't that cool?
Do you remember that place in LA next to LAX? It was a
The,
bar. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a plane themed bar at LAX or right
mm-mm,
outside LAX. Is right past the runway. You could just go there and like grab a drink and just like sit there and watch the planes take off. It was so
that's
fun.
so cool. There's a nice bar and restaurant at our local airport and it's really cute. You can like go, but then like the thing is that like Elvis and such used to like fly in from Palm Springs just to go to that restaurant
That
for
would be
like
cool to
the
see
uh,
Elvis's plane.
yeah, for like a little drink. Um, cool. Well, that's very, very scary.
I'm trying to think if I've ever seen Air Force One flying. I don't think I ever have.
I did find the pictures that I had from, remember I told you I saw that the spaceship getting a piggyback ride on the
Yeah,
airplane. I saw those pictures. They were like really crappy because I took them from like my BlackBerry, whenever that was, but it was cool. It like flew like low over Central Park and like in the thing. That was fun.
yeah. I think we saw the exact same event because I was in New York. I was flying in and out of New York sometime in like 2012, 11, something around
Mm-hmm.
there. And I remember I saw that too. The piggyback plane on the 747 was like, that's crazy looking.
It's crazy. That was cool.
But I'll bring more disasters because in the middle of like trying to research for this one, I ended up going down a rabbit hole of watching like 15 more air disaster shows on YouTube.
I know.
And there's so there's, it's fascinating stuff.
I know, like while you were talking, I was like, I watched like a thing and it ended up being these like just like a dramatization of like the pilots being like, what is going on? What do we do? And you're like, I don't know. And also like once again, talk about Star Wars. So talk about Star Wars. Oh, in the last episode, how we're watching like the original not the original ones, the number one, two, three. Everyone knows. And like, I just hate
You
how
mean the
they find.
original ones? You said it right the first time.
No, no, but the original ones are three or four, five, six. We're watching one, two, three.
You mean the ones that recently came out?
Recently means like 25 years ago. Yes.
Oh, those yeah, those suck.
No, I know they're
Okay,
terrible.
okay, yeah,
I
yeah.
know. We know they're terrible, but we're watching them in order and like whatever. So those are the ones I mean, where they're terrible, obviously. And like yesterday we were like watching a part where they're like Anakin and Padme were like, "I love you so much," and I was like, "Has George Lucas ever had anyone tell him that they love him?" Because this is so like unbelievably awful. But the number of like flying cars stresses me out, and then like they're always in like everyone is like flying in a battleship, and I'm like, can we just like sit down and have these conversations because this is like so dangerous.
I was watching the LA riots on
Hmm.
CNN just now, and they spray painted and set fire to a bunch of Waymos, and I was like, sentient, like AI driven things are like the only way we're gonna. We gotta be nice to these things. Like we
I
gotta be
know we gotta be
nicer to
nice
these
to it.
things.
I would set fire to a scooter if given the opportunity,
I mean,
like a bird
my
scooter.
problem here's the thing. Here's the thing. The problem isn't the scooter. The problem is the people that ride the scooters.
Remember, I had that
Set fire to
idea
the
for
people. They'll be better.
yeah, I had that idea that like if for an app where you could just like tell people where scooters are and set them on fire because I hate them so much. I mean, they're not here. Obviously, we're very lucky, but like man, they're just like garbage and like covered in pee and like disgusting on the ground. People just like pick it up and use it. I'm like, girl,
I know when I
this is
see
so
one that's like
gross.
I've seen them abandoned on the side of the highway, like on the 110 before. I'm like, what were you doing? Like how drunk and high were you that you
Yeah,
ended up with a bird or a lime here?
so stupid, so dangerous. Um, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's terrible. I can't wait to hear more terrible stories of plane crashes.
Yeah, there's another one that I'm contemplating, but I think I'm oversaturating our listeners with air disaster stuff. So maybe I'll take a breather for a bit.
I mean, it's just it's so many people in one spot, that makes it so dangerous when
Yeah.
you're in the air,
And the
which is like
original,
safe, but like unless something goes wrong, like you're saying, so stuff that like has like I remember I was talking to Ben, my pilot friend. He's like, yeah, but every time you figure something out, then that's not a problem anymore. And you're like, yeah, but there's like
but you could be the one that you figure it out on.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was gonna do in Berlin, there was a Radisson that had like the biggest freestanding fish tank in the world. It was in their lobby
I
and it exploded. And it
do
had
want to
like
hear about that.
yeah, but like the problem is like the investigation like wrapped and they were like there was no it was just it was in Germany, so like there was no transparency in terms of what was going on. And yeah, I couldn't really dig up a lot of good facts about that. It's called the Aquadome, if anybody's curious. It's a Radisson. And
Ooh,
now it's a garden. Like now they kept the base of the because the elevator goes to the middle of it. Is they
oh.
kept the base of it and they just turned it into a garden.
I'm looking at the pictures of it after it exploded. Um, yeah, I
So
saw a picture. I saw something online that was like an underwater hotel, and I was like, absolutely not.
yeah, no, we're good. We're
I
good. We
don't
don't
want to
need
be
that.
in the reverse fish tank. No,
Yeah, it's called a human tank at that point, Taylor.
no, I get it. You're right. Whoa.
um, yeah. So if I can dig up more info, or if anybody knows where I can dig up more info about that, I'll do that one. But I started researching. Was like, this is like gonna be like a 10-minute episode. I can't do that. So
Yeah,
anywho, hope you all enjoyed it. If y'all are getting over the air disaster ones, let me know. Although there's like so many crazy ones that are worth talking about that like I don't know, it's fascinating to me. So if y'all find it fascinating, let me know. Otherwise, I can pivot to things that are a little bit different, mix up a little bit.
yeah. Cool.
Um,
That's exciting.
and our email again, doingitfellpod@gmail.com. Find us on all the socials, doingitfellpod. Taylor, do we have any mail?
Um, yes, sort of. Nadine and I were chatting post Hands Across America again, and I think we talked about this before. I think maybe when just like so many times we've talked about how the infrastructure and like the money that you spend to keep a nonprofit open, sometimes you just like can't actually do good and how frustrating that is. So we are just like chatting about that because it's like one of those things where like, yeah, we'll raise some money, but we spent so much money to do this thing, or this person gets paid this much, but also people need to live, and like, what is? It's a hard thing to figure out how to help everybody.
Not to shout out Ezra Klein yet again. there's parallels here, which is if you try to do everything and be everything to everyone, then you're nothing to everyone. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
like, I don't know. So,
yeah,
um, yeah, good call out. But
yeah.
anywho,
It's frustrating when you're like, oh, I want to give my money to something and like, what's it going to do? Oh, but also speaking of charities, I did, my kids spent $20 to dunk me in a dunk tank on Saturday and it was very fun.
what was the charity?
Our little league. So they're just like raising money to like they
That's
have to
great.
like maintain the field and such. So they each got for $10 each. They got 5 balls. They didn't do it, but the guy let them push the button together. And I got dunked, and it was actually very nice because it was like it's getting really hot. I think it's part of the reason why I'm so grumpy is that it's getting really hot, and I know it's going to. It happens every year, but I'm still grumpy about it.
That is a good dunk man operator because
Yeah,
yeah, you got to get dunked.
you gotta. So that was fun.
Sweet.
Cool.
Anything else to share?
Nope, I'm gonna drink the rest of this wine and try to stop being grumpy.
Do your
That's it.
best. We'll go ahead and
That's it.
cut things off with that. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor.